All right, let's dive into this explainer. Today, we're looking at one of the most profound, yet honestly completely overlooked philosophical voices of the 20th century. We're talking about María Zambrano. Born in Spain in 1904, she lived through some of the absolute most turbulent, devastating events of modern history. And in the process, she completely reimagined what philosophy could even be. Even as a kid growing up in Spain, Zambrano had this wildly independent streak. She actually dreamed of being a music box that played her own tune, or what she called a sentinel of the night. And these were really early signs of her absolute fascination with the hidden, messy depths of the human soul. She figured out really early on that just playing the traditional accepted music handed down by society, that wasn't going to cut it for her. She had to forge her own intellectual path. Which brings us to the core of what we're looking at today. How does a woman, completely erased from her own homeland for 45 years, ultimately become its greatest philosophical voice? We're going to explore how Zambrano's really harrowing survival of war and displacement forged this groundbreaking philosophy, one that actually speaks directly to our modern-day feelings of alienation. So let's start at the beginning, the Sentinel of the Night, early life and education. We're going to look at her intellectual roots in early 20th century Spain, a place heavily caught between really old traditions and super rapid modernization. So, as a university student in Madrid, Zambrano studied under the incredibly famous philosopher José Ortega y Gasset. But she eventually hit a wall and diverged from his concept of vital reason. See, while her mentor was super focused on reason being bound to historical circumstances, Zambrano realized she had to go deeper. She wanted to explore the visceral, unexplainable parts of human existence. There's actually this famous story where she left his office in tears, feeling totally intellectually orphaned, just because she knew traditional logic simply wasn't enough to capture the full interior reality of being human. But her intellectual journey was violently interrupted by history, leading us to our next chapter, war and the long exile. The crucial takeaway here is that Zambrano's philosophy wasn't born in some quiet, comfy academic ivory tower. It was forged in the absolute traumatic crucible of the Spanish Civil War. When a military coup struck the elected government back in July 1936, Zambrano did not hide. She actively coordinated intellectual defense for the Republic. She even organized the evacuation of orphan children from heavy war zones in Valencia. And then, when the Republic finally fell in 1939, it triggered this massive refugee exodus, and Zambrano was swept right up in it. And the sheer scale of her displacement is just relentless. She was constantly moving across continents, yet somehow continuing to write prolifically. I mean, she literally crossed the Pyrenees Mountains on foot into France in 1939. She spent the 1940s bouncing around teaching in Mexico, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. Eventually, she made her way back to Europe in the 50s, famously filling her Roman apartment with intellectuals and a whole bunch of stray cats. After that came profound rural isolation in a French cottage in the 60s. She literally wouldn't make her triumphant return to a newly democratic Spain until 1984. 45. She endured 45 long years of exile, crushing poverty, and really profound personal tragedies. During all this time away from her homeland, she was separated from her mother, who sadly died before they could ever reunite. She also became the primary caregiver for her sister, who had endured severe torture by the Gestapo during World War II. But here is what is truly profound about her. She actually transformed the tragic, awful reality of being a refugee into this universal philosophical condition of human searching. She didn't just see exile as a geopolitical status on a piece of paper, She embraced it as a state of being, a perpetual search for truth, without having the comfort of solid ground beneath your feet. And living in that constant state of wandering led her to question the very foundations of Western thought, taking us to our next section, critiquing Western rationalism. Think for a second about how we process crises today. Zambrano realized that cold, strict logic simply wasn't enough to capture the trauma and the sheer fullness of the human experience. Where Enlightenment rationality prized objective distance and pure, cold abstraction, Zambrano pushed back. She insisted we look at intuition, emotion, dreams, and what she called the entrañas, our deepest, most visceral, gutsy depths. Pure logic just could not explain the immense suffering she saw across Europe, so she realized she needed a brand new tool. To heal this painful divide between cold logic and vibrant lived experience, she developed her most famous concept, which we'll look at right now, the dawn of poetic reason. She called it poetic reason. Now, she wasn't rejecting reason altogether. She was expanding it. She passionately argued that to think is to decipher what one feels. I love that.
For centuries, Western thought had forcefully separated philosophy from poetry, while Zambrano stitched them right back together. She believed that imagination and emotion were absolutely required to articulate the hardest, most deeply buried truths of human life.
And this concept builds a beautifully unique vocabulary. Instead of the blinding sun of absolute certainty, she favored the dawn, a gentle, almost maternal emergence of truth. Think about it. Western philosophy often relies on Plato's metaphor of the sun, right? This idea that truth is absolute, immediate, and completely illuminating all at once. Zambrano thought that was way too forceful, too violent almost. She preferred the aurora, the dawn. True understanding to her arrives patiently, gradually, and even a little hesitantly, just like the early morning light. Moving right along to our next concept, piety, love, and democracy. So, practically speaking, how do we apply this poetic reason to society and to our everyday relationships? Well, it starts with her concept of piety, or piedad. She argued that modern tolerance is often just a really polite way of avoiding people who are different from us. True piety, on the other hand, demands that we genuinely communicate with the stranger, the exile, or the sick, completely on their own terms. It requires real tenderness and deep attentiveness, not just keeping a polite, safe distance. And this is where she warns us against hiding behind the mask of a character. Think of a character as a strict political ideology or a collective identity, something that basically absolves us of our moral responsibility to be a true person. A person, in her view, is always searching. They're deeply relational and ethically accountable for their actions. But a character, that's a rigid mask. It allows humans to dominate or hurt others without feeling an ounce of personal guilt. Which brings us to her genuinely stunning definition of democracy. She says, democracy is the society in which not only is it permitted, but it is required to be a person. It's not just a political system of voting. It is an ethical requirement to recognize the dignity and relational existence of every single human being. Democracy, for Zambrano, is literally the only society that demands you take off the mask of the character and actually show up as a true, accountable person. Finally, let's look at why her philosophy is, honestly, more vital now than ever before in Zambrano's legacy today. After returning to Spain in 1984, the country that had forcibly forgotten her for decades finally recognized her immense contributions to literature and humanism. Her apartment in Madrid basically became this vibrant gathering place for students, artists, and intellectuals. She would sit there engaging in deep philosophical dialogue, almost exactly like Socrates once did. And in 1988, she was finally celebrated with the highly prestigious Cervantes Prize, becoming the first woman to ever receive it. But her sharp insights lasted right up until the very end. In one of her final essays, written during the Gulf War in 1990, she brilliantly points out that true peace requires constant, active cultivation of our humanity. Peace is not just a neutral state where bombs aren't dropping. It's an active way of living. It's a way of inhabiting the planet that requires our constant, conscious, ethical engagement every single day. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this challenge. In our highly fractured modern world, look past cold logic. Embrace the slow dawn of your own understanding and ask yourself how you are living out Zambrano's call for true, empathetic connection. Are you showing up as a rigid character or as a true, accountable person? Thanks for exploring the profound depths of María Zambrano with me. Keep asking questions and keep searching for that light.